My name is Grace, and I'm 27. I've always known that in my family I wasn't the favorite. Maybe no one ever said it out loud, but the silence around me said enough. I grew up in a home where expectations had a shape, and I never quite fit into it. My younger sister Emma was everything they hoped for. She was quiet, polite, and brilliant with numbers. By the time she was 10, she was building robots with Dad in the garage. I was upstairs writing stories about faraway places and painting sunsets that looked nothing like the real thing. They said I had a vivid imagination, but not in a way that sounded like a compliment. Every report card night, Emma's grades were passed around the dinner table like trophies. Mine were glanced at, then tucked away. If I tried to talk about my ideas, someone would change the subject. When I said I wanted to study creative writing, my mom laughed and asked what kind of job I thought I could get with that. She said it kindly, like she didn't mean anything by it. But I heard it anyway. I learned how to take up less space. I stopped sharing my thoughts. I stopped expecting them to ask how I was doing. I became the girl who was always off in her own world. And eventually I believed maybe that world really didn't matter. Emma got into a top university. She graduated with honors. She was the one they introduced proudly to neighbors and friends. I was the one who helped set the table. It wasn't jealousy. It was just the quiet ache of never being seen. It's funny how you start to expect less from people who are supposed to love you most. I stopped hoping for praise. I stopped trying to be chosen. I built a life around that missing space like a house with one wall always left unfinished. And when I finally decided to leave it behind, no one stopped me. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. Because sometimes being invisible is the best way to learn how to see everything clearly. And I saw more than they ever thought I would. It was my mom's 60th birthday, a big deal in our family. Dad had rented out a private room at her favorite restaurant. Candlelight flickered off the wine glasses, soft jazz played in the background, and the smell of roasted lamb and rosemary filled the air. Everyone looked their best. Emma wore a sleek navy dress. I wore a second-hand blouse I'd found on sale last week. We sat around a long table with white linens and neatly folded napkins. I was at the far end between two cousins I barely knew. They laughed, toasted, passed dishes back and forth like some perfect family tableau. No one asked me how work was going. No one mentioned my name at all. I poured myself water and watched the ice melt in slow silence. After dessert, Dad stood up and tapped a spoon to his glass. He smiled like a man about to announce something unforgettable. I knew that smile. He used it when he closed big deals. I sat up a little straighter. He said the company had reached a turning point, that the next chapter would be led by someone who represented both the future and the values they'd built from day one. Then he turned to Emma and said they'd officially chosen her to be CEO. The table erupted into applause. Someone shouted about how it was about time. Emma looked shocked but pleased. Mom beamed. My uncle raised his glass. I didn't move. My heart made this weird, slow sink. It felt like trying to breathe underwater. The company they were talking about, the one they said Emma would now lead, was the very thing I had planted the seed for years ago. I'd been the one who pushed for digital strategy, who built the first online customer funnel, who drafted their rebrand on sticky notes late at night when the rest of them were asleep. And yet here I was, left out of the sentence entirely. No mention. Not a word. Like I had never been part of it. Like I hadn't mattered. I watched Emma stand and give a short thank you speech. She talked about honoring the family's legacy and steering it with purpose. She said she'd try her best to live up to their trust. My dad gave her a hug. People clapped again. I took another sip of my water. It tasted metallic. When the dinner ended, no one asked me if I was okay. Not even Emma. My mom leaned in and said she hoped I wasn't upset, that I should be happy for my sister. She said it softly, almost like she didn't expect a response, so I gave her none. The worst part wasn't being passed over. It was knowing they didn't even think it would hurt me. Like my connection to it was so invisible, so unimportant that I couldn't possibly care. That I'd just keep floating around the edges like always. I walked to the parking lot alone. My heels clicked on the concrete. It was chilly for May, the wind catching the edge of my jacket. I reached my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a full 10 minutes before even turning the engine on. I thought about texting someone, a friend, an old coworker, anyone who could remind me I wasn't going crazy. But I didn't, because deep down I already knew this was real, and I needed to let it sink in. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry the way you might think. I didn't want to scream or break things. What I felt was quieter. Like a thread had snapped and everything around me went still. I realized something in that silence. I had spent years trying to be part of something that had no room for me. I had knocked, waited, even smiled through the closed door, hoping one day they'd let me in. But maybe the door was never meant to open, and maybe it was time to build my own house entirely, one with no doors to beg at. One where I didn't have to ask to belong. I didn't pack much. A few clothes, my old laptop, and a notebook I'd had since college. I booked a one-way ticket to Portland and didn't tell anyone except my landlord. The lease on my tiny apartment back home ended that week. I let it go. Just like that. Portland wasn't a glamorous escape. I didn't land in some city of dreams. I moved into a basement studio with flickering lights and pipes that groaned every time someone upstairs turned on the shower. But for the first time in my life, the space was mine. No one had opinions about the curtains or my plans or whether what I was doing made sense. I worked part-time at a coffee shop. Early mornings behind the counter calling out oat milk lattes and sweeping floors before sunrise. By afternoon, I was in the library using free Wi-Fi to build something. I didn't know what to call it yet. I just knew I wanted to help other creatives like me. People with ideas and vision but no support system. People who had been told their dreams were too soft, too strange, too risky. At first, it was a messy blog, then a shared Google Doc of job leads, then a weekly newsletter. I called it Foundry, a place where talent gets shaped, where overlooked people find each other. I didn't know it would become anything big. I only knew I couldn't go back. No one from my family called. No texts. No emails. I deleted social media for a while just to breathe. I knew if I saw them smiling on my feed, I'd unravel. Instead, I focused on one task at a time. Write the post. Edit the layout, answer the email, update the job board, repeat. Some nights I cried. Not because I missed them. Not exactly. But because building something alone is hard even when you believe in it. Especially when you believe in it. The first month, 3 people subscribed to my newsletter. Then 12. Then 30. I remember when I hit 100. I walked to the park near my apartment, sat on a bench, and just let myself feel proud. No confetti. No audience. Just me finally seeing myself. Word spread. Creatives started tagging each other. A designer in Seattle messaged to say she landed a project through Foundry. A voice actor in Ohio got her first audiobook gig. I created a Slack group so they could connect. They began helping each other, lifting each other up, sharing contacts I could never have found on my own. I still worked at the coffee shop, still paid rent late sometimes, still had moments where I wondered if it would be easier to just go home and say I was wrong. But every time I opened my laptop and saw the messages pouring in, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By the end of the year, Foundry had 5,000 subscribers. I launched a paid tier with exclusive content and a freelancer directory. It wasn't flashy money, but it covered groceries. I bought a real desk. I painted the wall behind it a shade of pale green that reminded me of sea glass. Peaceful. Grounded. One morning around 8:15 a.m., I got an email from a major creative agency. They wanted to consult with me about building something similar for their internal team. I read it 3 times to make sure it wasn't spam. Then I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed a second to sit with that version of me. The one who used to feel invisible. The one who used to ask permission. She deserved to see this moment unfold without panic, without apology. I spent that afternoon on the phone with their director, walking her through my process. She asked about my background, and I told her the short version. I said I used to be involved in a family business, that I had ideas no one wanted, that I left to make something on my own. She paused and said she was glad I did. I hung up, closed my laptop, and stood by the window for a long time. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the glass. It felt quiet, full, like maybe I'd stopped building a life out of hurt. Maybe I was building it out of purpose now, and not once, not even for a second, did I wish I'd stayed. It started with a voicemail. A woman's voice, crisp and polite, saying she was with Kestrel Global, a creative consultancy firm based in San Francisco. She had read about Foundry, seen our subscriber growth, and wanted to talk about a possible collaboration. I called her back that afternoon. We spoke for 30 minutes. She asked about the structure, how we managed partnerships, how we vetted freelancers. I answered calmly, clearly. She said they were in final talks with a corporate client launching a new creator-driven campaign. A major one. They needed someone to lead the freelance strategy. Someone who understood creative ecosystems, not just data. She said the client had one specific request: they wanted me. I blinked. I asked who the client was. She hesitated for a moment, then said it was Grafton Holdings. My father's company. My sister's company now. I didn't react. Just said I was listening. She explained the client had loved my ideas in a past proposal they'd seen in old white paper I'd written before I left. They didn't know the internal shift that had happened. They only knew the person who wrote that document wasn't in the room anymore, and they wanted her back. I told her I'd think about it. Then I sat with that feeling for an entire day. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity, like the universe had looped in on itself and handed me a mirror. 2 days later, I got an email, this time from Emma. It was short. She asked if we could talk. She said the deal might fall through if I didn't show up. I stared at her name on my screen. I hadn't seen it in months. Maybe longer. I responded with a single line. I said yes. Not for her. For the work. We met in a sterile conference room on the 16th floor of their downtown office. The walls were bare, the windows too clean, the coffee stale. Emma was already there when I walked in. She stood up, offered a handshake. Her expression was hard to read. I didn't smile. There were others in the room. Their head of strategy, 2 project leads, a legal rep. I recognized a few of them from years ago. No one spoke about the past. We sat, Emma asked me to walk them through the proposal. I did. I talked about network architecture, creative life cycle brand, voice consistency. I showed them what Foundry had done, who we'd connected, what the metrics were. No one interrupted. No one questioned. Emma nodded slowly. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just softer, less certain. She asked 2 follow-up questions. I answered both without hesitation. Then I stood up, gathered my laptop, and said I'd leave the contract details with Kestrel's rep. I thanked them for their time. I looked directly at Emma and said I hoped the campaign would succeed. She didn't say much, just nodded. As I left the room, I heard someone whisper to her. Something about how they didn't realize I was the original architect behind the project. Emma didn't respond. In the elevator, I felt nothing. No vindication, no smugness, just a strange clarity. Like the last piece of a puzzle had slid quietly into place. I wasn't part of their story anymore, but they were still brushing against mine. That night I made tea and sat on the fire escape behind my apartment. The air was cool. My phone buzzed once. A message from Kestrel confirming the client signed off. Deal closed. $1 million. It wasn't mine, not entirely. But I was the reason it happened. And everyone in that room knew it. I never told anyone outside of work. Not my neighbors, not the freelancers I mentored, not even the girl at the coffee shop who always asked how my day was going. Some victories are quiet on purpose. Some power is strongest when it doesn't need to roar. I didn't tell my parents either. I figured Emma would. Or maybe not. What mattered was simple. They couldn't finish what I started. And for once, I didn't need them to admit it. I already knew. Emma texted me a few days after the meeting. Just asked if I had time for coffee. Nothing formal. No apology. I almost said no. But something in the way she wrote it made me pause. We met at a quiet cafe near the river, a place neither of us had been before. She got there first, already seated with a tea in front of her. When I walked in, she looked up and gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I sat down. We didn't talk for a minute. Then she took a deep breath and said she was tired. Not just physically, but bone-deep, soul-level tired. She said she never wanted to be CEO, that she had only said yes because Dad made it sound like the only option, like turning it down would mean breaking the family. She stirred her tea slowly, like she was afraid to look up. She said they always made her feel like the reliable one, the smart one, the one who didn't cause problems. So she swallowed what she wanted and learned how to wear every role they gave her. She said it started small. Sleepless nights. Stomach pain. Then the panic attacks came. Therapy followed. Twice a week. Still going. She said the worst part wasn't the pressure. It was knowing she was always being measured against me even though no one said it out loud. I blinked. I asked why she never told me. She looked at me, then really looked, and said she didn't think I'd want to hear it. That she thought I hated her. That maybe she deserved it. I didn't say anything for a long time. My hands were wrapped around my coffee cup, but it had already gone cold. I watched the people outside pass by like moving shadows. I had spent years resenting Emma, thinking she got everything handed to her. And maybe she had. But now I saw the cost. She wasn't the villain, just another daughter caught in a story someone else wrote. She asked if I was angry. I said I had been, that I'd carried it like bricks in my chest. But in that moment I wasn't. What I felt was something quieter, like setting those bricks down one by one. We left the cafe together. She hugged me before we parted. Not stiff, not forced, just honest. When I walked home, I didn't feel better, but I felt lighter. And maybe that was enough for now. I didn't go back to the office. Not once. I didn't ask for a title, or shares, or even a conversation with my parents about what had happened. I didn't need it. Instead, I wrote an email. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. I thanked them for what they gave me, for the discipline, the foundation, the work ethic I'd carried into every room I ever walked into. I told them I understood they had done their best with what they knew, that I no longer needed their recognition to feel whole. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need that either. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision not to carry the weight anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt steady. Like closing a chapter you've reread too many times. Emma and I stayed in touch. We sent each other articles, shared little updates. Nothing too deep at first. But it was enough. The conversations started to shift. She sent photos of her therapy garden. I told her about the new grant I'd won for Foundry. We started becoming sisters in a way we never had before. No performances, no roles, just two women learning how to be themselves around each other. My parents didn't reach out again. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe silence was their apology. I didn't chase it. Some relationships work better from a distance. That too was something I made peace with. One morning around 7:20 a.m., I opened the window in my kitchen and felt the soft breeze roll in. I was eating a bowl of fruit. No phone in hand. No music playing. Just stillness. I realized I hadn't thought about the company in weeks. That's what healing looked like for me. Not some big announcement. Not reconciliation with fanfare. Just living. Just being okay. And that was more than enough. This is for anyone who wasn't picked. For anyone who felt like the extra, the background character, the one who only got asked to help, never to lead. I know how it feels to be overlooked. To work quietly hoping someone notices. To give your best and still not be the one they call on. But let me tell you something they don't teach you early enough. You don't have to be chosen by them. You can choose yourself. You can build something from that ache. You can turn all that quiet strength into something that doesn't just survive, but thrives. Success isn't loud. It isn't shiny. Sometimes it's just peace. Knowing you're living your life on your terms. Not to prove a point. Not to win someone back. But because it finally fits. You don't need permission. You don't need applause. What you need is one small step. Then another after that. And eventually you'll look back and see how far you've come. Not because someone opened a door for you, but because you built your own. A few weeks ago, Emma and I drove out to the coast. It was a clear day. We sat on a bench watching the waves roll in side by side. No words. Just a soft silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. Just air. Just space. Just two people figuring it out. That moment wasn't dramatic, but it meant everything. So if no one ever told you this, let me be the one. You matter. Even if they didn't see it. Even if they still don't. You are not defined by who failed to recognize you. You are already enough, and your story is still unfolding.